Hello and welcome to this virtual edition of the OC Forum. My name is Ariana Barrios, Executive Director of the Forum, and I'm so grateful you joined us today. This special limited series focuses on an issue that has been deeply impacting our Southern California community: immigration. Featuring voices from across Orange County, we will explore this issue in three parts: how we got here, where we are now, and what's next. Thank you so much for joining us. Over the past month, the immigration issue has exploded across the country and into our daily lives. While stories have been emerging nationally of increased enforcement, deportations, and various legal battles since the beginning of President Trump's second term on January 20th, it was not until June 6th that the issue became headline news in Southern California. On that day, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE, conducted coordinated raids in various locations across Los Angeles. The raids, targeting individuals suspected of immigration violations, took place largely in public view at a Home Depot, a garment factory, and multiple warehouses across the greater Los Angeles area. The raids triggered immediate protests and demonstrations in and around the Federal Building in downtown LA. As protesters gathered across a 3 to 4 block area, the vast majority remained peaceful. But by that evening and into the following day, some protesters had begun clashing with LAPD and immigration officials. As those interactions turned violent, several downtown stores were looted and autonomous vehicles were summoned to the area and burned. 3 days later, another large protest took place in Santa Ana, again focused on our local Federal Building in Orange County, where more immigration detainees were being held. During this 72-hour period, as tensions grew and more protests formed, the president summoned both the National Guard and a contingent of U.S. Marines to help quell civil unrest against the explicit wishes of California Governor Newsom and LA's Mayor Karen Bass and Santa Ana's Mayor Valeria Mesqua. So how did we get here?
I'm seeing what we're all seeing as people who follow the issue of immigration. 12 or 13 million American workers who've been freely offered jobs by American enterprises who, by and large, pay their taxes and take care of their families, take care of their communities, and attend our churches. They are in technical violation of immigration laws and regulations, but they're not criminals. They've never been criminals, and they never will be criminals. They're law-abiding, hard-working American workers doing the best they can in a broken immigration system that our politicians have been refusing to fix for as long as I can remember in California. And President Reagan believed in regularizing these workers. George W. Bush believed in regularizing these workers. Every president until the current one believed in regularizing these workers. But the current government puts them all in one basket, one big group of criminals, scapegoating 12 to 13 million hardworking immigrant workers. And the way we're experiencing this in the Diocese of Los Angeles is that in cruel workplace raids 2 Fridays ago, 13 folks affiliated with one of our churches in the heart of Los Angeles were rounded up while working 10-hour days in a downtown Los Angeles shirt-making factory. And so right now, their children and spouses are waiting at home for news about where those who have been seized are. No money is coming in. It's harder to put food on the table. We have a church in Santa Ana called Messiah, and the rector of Messiah Church, the Reverend Abel Lopez, told me when I saw him a few days ago that downtown Santa Ana is a ghost town. Businesses aren't opening. People are afraid to go to work. They're afraid to walk the streets. They're afraid to go to backyard birthday parties. They're afraid to go to church.
The U.S. has long had trouble reconciling its immigrant history with the realities of nativist feelings as each new influx has occurred. And California in particular is no stranger to difficult conversations and problematic public policy around its relationship with Mexico and Latin America, immigrant labor, indigenous people, and the burgeoning Hispanic communities of today. From the 1800s Chinese Exclusion Act and segregation of Chinese and Mexican students in public schools, to Japanese internment camps during World War II and the passage of Prop 187, we have struggled with these issues. We asked Professor Robert Chang of UCI Law how legal authority over immigration has been wielded at the federal level.
Initially, it starts out with Congress having the power, but Congress can delegate authority to the executive. And so in certain matters, Congress has delegated authority to the executive, and then the executive acts. And so actually the first travel ban that I've been able to identify was issued by President Theodore Roosevelt in the early 1900s. And what happened there was that Congress passed a law that said that if you, President, feel that there are laborers coming in that threaten native labor in the United States, that you can act to stop them. And so then Theodore Roosevelt issued an executive order that said, well, laborers coming in from, of Japanese ancestry and Korean ancestry who are coming in from Hawaii and Mexico and Canada are a threat. And so therefore, I'm going to exclude them. And so what we have is this interplay between initially the authority that resides with Congress, but then certain powers that are given by Congress to the executive. And so that's part of the interplay. And so when during the first Trump administration, the travel bans were issued, the president was acting based on authority that was given by Congress to the executive. And so that's why we have this interplay of the political branches exercising this power. But for me, the really dangerous part of this is that because of the plenary power doctrine, the role of the courts in terms of checking whether it's the action of Congress or the action of the executive, well, the problem is that the judiciary gives a lot of deference, and in my opinion, too much deference.
Delegation of congressional authority was utilized in the 1950s by President Eisenhower to implement one of the most infamous mass deportation programs of the modern era, Operation Wetback.
It referred to a mass deportation initiative to remove arguably millions of mostly Mexican farm workers. And the term wetback comes from the Spanish mojado, which means wetback. And it was because Mexicans were crossing the Rio Grande River to come into the United States without documentation, and mostly to work in the farms of the southwest of the United States. And so that's where the term wetback comes from, but it's very derogatory. It was used commonly at the time. There was less sort of sensitivity to not using disrespectful terms in political parlance. And so the operation that was created by the Border Patrol was actually called Operation Wetback. And the idea was they wanted to very suddenly and massively relocate millions of Mexican farm workers back to Mexico. However, there was one really very important difference between that program in the 1950s. It was implemented essentially over about 8 months in the year of 1954, and what we're looking at today. And that is, it was in the context of a massive guest worker program called the Bracero program, which was in place from 1942 until 1964. And the purpose of Operation Wetback was not to end immigration to the United States, but rather to force particularly Texas growers to hire Mexican workers through the Bracero program, which was legally, rather than contracting undocumented workers who were a lot cheaper. And so it's a very different kind of scenario, I think, in many ways than what we're seeing today. Initially, it had an impact certainly on border arrests. They went down, they plummeted after around 1955. But the main reason is because now Mexicans were being contracted under the Bracero program. Between 1953 and 1956, the annual number of legal contracts more than doubled to nearly 500,000. And so it's not that Mexicans weren't coming to the United States to work, it's that they were coming through legal channels rather than having to cross without documents and be subject to arrest or deportation. So in that sense, it worked in that it did push immigration from being more illegal to more legal. However, as soon as the Bracero program was ended in 1964, border arrest went right back up.
It's critical, I think, to understand this as the starting point for why we find ourselves in the place where we find ourselves today. Politicians have often used immigration as a way to gain political power and elected office.
Throughout the 2024 presidential campaign, candidate Trump made immigration and mass deportations a central theme of his stump speeches and campaign messages.
You've talked about prioritizing people who have criminal histories.
Correct.
But is it your plan to deport everyone who is here illegally over the next 4 years?
Well, I think you have to do it. And it's a very tough thing to do. But you have to have, you have rules, regulations, laws. They came in illegally. And these are murderers, many of whom murdered more than one person. You don't want those people in this country.
But you're saying something, sir, that's significant. I just want to make sure I'm clear, which is that you're saying, yes, you're going to focus on the people with criminal histories, but everyone who's here illegally has to go.
I'm saying this. We have to get the criminals out of our country. I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Think of that. 1798. That's when we had real politicians that said we're not going to play games. We have to go back to 1798 to target and dismantle every migrant criminal network operating on American soil. We're going to knock the hell out of them.
I know the president likes to speak in superlatives, but, he was very upfront in the campaign that he wanted the largest deportation force in the history of our country. And so, he is starting to try to deliver on that. Obviously, there are some court battles. There are some, unfortunately, protests and things like that are, kind of inhibiting that. But, we're seeing the start of what he promised. And so, when you look at the election win, whether it was capturing all the swing states or winning the popular vote, which a lot of people didn't think was possible, the American people, I believe, did vote for this. And, maybe those details as they're coming out and the actual execution of it maybe isn't as perfect as people had thought. But the truth is, that this is something that, again, because this issue has gone unresolved for so long, just the sheer number of individuals that we're talking about, and then working with different states, working with different municipalities, or not working with them, has proved to be, pretty difficult. But this, again, is what he promised he would deliver on. LA is home to me. My family still lives there. My grandma, my parents, sister, everyone. So it is very near and dear to my heart. And so seeing everything that has occurred over the past 2 weeks, I'd say it's an unfortunate situation. Listen, we're facing an issue, I should say, that has really transcended administrations. It's transcended various leadership in the House and in the Senate. And it's a problem that has just continued to be unsolved. Maybe the last time in the 80s is when there was anything real done about immigration. And so we're kind of at a pivotal point where you have the number of illegal immigrants in the country has ballooned so large, largely due to lack of enforcement from a number of administrations. But now we're at a point where what do we do, right? What do we do about that massive number? Estimates kind of go everywhere, but if you look at Pew Research, they estimate a little over 11 million, which happens to be larger than about 45 states and their populations. So it is a massive issue, and it's something that was a pivotal point in the 2024 election.
You can see a fairly dramatic shift that took place very recently. And what I'm talking about is this right here. This is 22. This is 23, and it started right down here in 2020, which was the bottom. That was when President Trump left office. So if the theme is that this is being driven by Trump rhetoric, that's only partially true, because this spike shift was created during President Biden's term. And I think that matters because it speaks to fundamentally, and I listen to people for a living, that this is not a racist issue, this change in opinion. This is a change in opinion that has been based upon two key components. One is, during the past 4 years, the border was largely viewed as chaotic, overwhelming, and completely without any sort of control. And that lies at the former administration's footsteps. I'm not saying this in a partisan way. I'm not one way or another. This is just the reality. It was not handled in a way that American voters viewed. And that's what I'm talking about, American voters' perceptions. And there just simply is no appetite among American voters for a border that has no rule of law and order. I mean, there's an appetite for immigration, but there's zero appetite. In fact, up until this last year or last several years, when everything went completely chaotic, there was a significant appetite for increased immigration that was legal and so forth. But the long tail of the chaos that was introduced, again, this is not from a partisan standpoint. It's not partisan. It's just, and Americans viewed this clearly. It was not a good situation, and that is coloring everything. If order can be brought back at the border, then there will be, I believe, significant appetite that will swing back into the space of, we should have increased healthy immigration, and there's a way to do that.
Immigration is always the political piñata. You want to win a campaign, you go back to Pete Wilson and even before. If you want to win a re-election, you just take out the immigration boogeyman, and you do pretty well. The problem is there's a long-term damage to our economy. And first of all, facts are, it's not only Mexicans, it's not only Latinos that are being deported. I've been to this facility, I've seen Asians, I've seen Vietnamese, I've seen Chinese lined up, ready to be deported. Second of all, understand, they're part of the economic miracle of California.
The headline of this was, we're going to target criminals. And he characterized the influx of immigration that had taken place as being largely criminals and so forth. That characterization stuck.
Throughout 2024, the president had been transparent about his plan to implement mass deportations and had been largely successful in characterizing America's undocumented population as both criminal and violent. Coupled with President Biden's lackluster record on border security, voters overwhelmingly showed support for the expulsion of undocumented aliens with violent criminal records. Why then has the fulfillment of these plans caused outrage and sparked large-scale protests and civil unrest? One reason lies in the makeup of today's undocumented population, the vast majority of whom are not violent nor entered illegally, a population that is vastly different today than it was just 10 years ago.
It has changed dramatically. So in the 1950s, the undocumented population in the United States was almost entirely Mexican. And this is actually true until quite recently. And the implications for a mass deportation program is that you send Mexicans across the border, they're in Mexico, right? The Mexican government has to take them because they are Mexican citizens. Now, Mexicans, in terms of border crossers, they account for less than a third of all migrants crossing the United States without authorization. So to deport those people is much more complicated and much more expensive. The other difference is that now the undocumented population, 2/3 of them as of 2017 had been in this country for at least 10 years. So these are people who've settled, who have families, who have jobs, who are members of communities. Many of them have US-born children, which mean their kids are citizens. So if you're going to deport those people, and this happened during the Obama administration and actually to a lesser degree during the Trump administration, if you deport parents of US-born children, either families get divided or US citizens are effectively being deported back to their parents' country of origin. So that's a really, really big difference. Another really big difference is that about 42% of all undocumented immigrants in the United States did not cross the US-Mexico border. They came on a tourist visa, student visa, work visa, and then they just stayed. So they're called visa overstayers. It's a very different population. You're going to have a lot of sort of well-educated people who have successful careers. Not to say some of the undocumented, those who cross the border aren't the same, but it's a much more diverse population in terms of income, education, national origin. I think Asians are the fastest growing undocumented population in the country, primarily people from India. So it's just a vastly different sort of tapestry.
In the different businesses that I've been a part of, partnering with different organizations, again, on a personal and my professional role, is I do believe that most people embrace our immigrant community. We know that we are hardworking. And so I do believe, and these are things that I read on social media, on newspaper articles, on television, is a lot of, let's go with business owners. It is impacting them. And so they're realizing, and not that they didn't realize it before, but I think it's hitting them even harder that, you know what? We are good people. It's not you against us or us against you. It's how do we both contribute to society and the bottom line? Because it's not one or the other, it's both. And I always like to go back to with the mission of our organization, because we impact the healthcare system. This is not just a CHIOC issue. This is not simply a hospital issue or a public health plan issue. It is a systemic issue where what I'm noticing now is individuals really thought that immigrants who potentially had committed a crime would be the group to be deported. However, they were deceived.
Once you start breaking it down, yes, there's that 54%. But when you look at this, you get the split opinion in terms of what I was talking about earlier, these different items, 4950, using state and local law enforcement to aid federal deportation efforts. Americans are divided on that. And that slides to more and more disapproval once you start getting into, for instance, this item, which I think is distinct in terms of the criminal versus folks who are just working here. 54% disapprove versus 45% approve of ICE conducting more raids where people in the U.S. illegally may be working. This is not something Americans approve of. Yeah, 45% approve, and it's not an insignificant number, but a majority disapproves. They don't view that as fair play. There's empathy. When you look at temporary protected status, ending that for those who have it, 59% disapprove of ending it. Suspending most applications for asylum, 60% disapprove that. Deporting some immigrants in the U.S. illegally to a prison in El Salvador, 61% disapprove of that.
He shared the message of, I'm going to arrest criminals. I'm going to arrest the bad guy. So, of course, people were like, yeah, we want the bad guy gone. Let's just say, for example, there's 100,000 people in prison in the state prisons across, in just in California that are undocumented and they're there for a violent felony. Yeah, okay. We thought you're going to take them, but they're not. They're taking families. They're going in the parks. They're, stopping you when you're going shopping. I went to Northgate the other day and there was hardly anybody in there. Why? They're afraid. Nobody wants a sexual predator, a rapist, a murderer, somebody dealing fentanyl and, killing people. Nobody wants that person here. And it doesn't matter to me what country you come from. Doesn't matter. Middle East, Mexico, Canada, wherever. Deport those people or put them wherever they belong, prison. But don't hurt our families. Don't separate our families. Don't touch our children. Please don't touch our children. And that if we can get back to some sense of calmness and normalcy. Because, again, the fear that people are feeling, we are truly going to see the repercussions. And I don't want people to be afraid to call the police if a crime occurs. I don't want people to be afraid to go to the doctors. So my hope would be truly as a mom, as a daughter, as a grandma, as a wife, and as the mayor. I want people to feel safe. You know, when this all started, immediately I was calling the police chief and the city manager on a regular basis every hour. It was like, give me an update, give me an update. Is the National Guard here yet? And I remember the night I called our city manager and I said, is the National Guard here? No, but they're on their way, Mayor. I said, you know, dear God, here we go. And it's that, I can't even tell you how I felt. I was sitting at the dinner table, not because we were having dinner, but I was sitting there with my husband and I said, you know, they're coming. And imagine those words, they're coming.
With social media, you don't know what, you know what you're reading, but you don't know how factual it is. I mean, we last week, what we received is that DHS and/or ICE was going to be attending or showing up at Medi-Cal enrollment offices. Well, we are the conduit and a partner to social services agency. So there has been a drop on the attendees. So what we did is we shifted to phone enrollment. Now, what we're also seeing when you go shopping, you know, here in Santa Ana, anywhere, this is going to be my mom went to El Super. El Super has sales on Thursdays for meat. She says, Georgina, it's usually crowded. You have to take a number. I went last Thursday and it was desolate.
We just became the 4th largest economy in the world. Ag, #1 in the nation. 70% of those workers undocumented. I mentioned manufacturing. Here in this area, biggest manufacturing sector in the United States, bigger than Michigan, bigger than Pennsylvania, a lot of undocumented workers. We pay $80 billion to $100 billion more to the federal government than we get back every year. We're a net donor to the feds. This is our work product. We're 4th largest economy. And God knows if Sacramento could lay off a little bit on the regulations, we could be bigger than Germany next year. Right? So Sacramento back off on the regulations, Mr. Trump back off on immigration, and we are going to do really well in California again and again and again.
When you start to peel the onion, and I know it's a terrible hackneyed phrase, but when you start to do that, you start to realize that there's nuance here, and it isn't, you know, cognitive dissonance. It's that, you know, we as human beings, we can have multiple different opinions about the same topic at the same time, and it's the details that matter. You know, when it's framed as always when we frame this in terms of questions, if it's should we deport those who are here illegally and have criminal records and are present a danger to society, the answer is overwhelmingly yes, 85% or whatever it might be. When we present it as, you know, should we be deporting working families who have been here for 5 or 10 years, or who have some kind of documented status now that they've entered, like TPS or whatever it might be, the support for removing those people, for deporting those people, just plummets. You know, Americans don't have an appetite for that. And this is where the administration starts to run into really dangerous waters for them. You know, right now, they enjoy significant support for, what is seen as imposing order at the border, and for that policy of removing people who could be dangerous. Once you expand outside of that space, and those stories start to come out, this is the key component. You know, once families start to be removed and people start understanding about this, it's this family have been here for 10 years, or 20 years, or 5 years, and they've been working here for however long and paying taxes, and their kids go to school and all this sort of thing, and they were removed forcibly and without process. That's the other part. People don't like the no due process component. That appetite, that sentiment will change dramatically.
In my lifetime, there has never been a moment like this, and it's a time of enormous peril. If this government actually intends to deport 4 million people over the next 4 years, it will rip our country in half, irrespective of the impact in individual lives and the economic impact and the thriving of the enterprises that depend on these workers. what it will do to us culturally and socially, what it will do to the soul of America, will take generations to repair.
Thank you for joining the OC Forum for this special series on immigration. Our show notes will include a variety of resources, links, full-length interviews, and more for you to explore after each episode. We also invite you to join the conversation online, within our social channels, or through the blog on our website. The OC Forum welcomes all points of view on the topics that we cover and are dedicated to promoting respectful and civil discourse. We ask that if you decide to comment, you keep this in mind and respect the opinions of others. Thank you again for joining the conversation today.